Why, hello there, friends. I'm gonna communicate using this Morse code and this newfangled radio invention. If that's what you think ham radio is all about, then you don't know ham radio on the Homestead. Keep watching to find out more. Well, hello there, homesteading friends. It's Jake with the Roaming Homesteaders, and just got off of work and thought I would sit down and talk with you about something I wanted to explore for a little bit here on the channel. But before we start, I hope you're all doing well. I've had a lot of great response on the videos in the last couple of weeks. We've gotten some comments on our channel, and I just really appreciate you taking time to watch our videos and comment and respond and ask questions, and it's just really exciting to see that there's some interest in our channel picking up. So wanted to say that first. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy our discussion today. Today I want to talk about something that I've been interested in for 27 years. In fact, I have actually been a licensed ham radio operator for 27 years and a couple of months. And something that I've seen in recent months and recent years is there's this new interest among homesteaders about ham radio, where it fits into the homesteading experience, emergency preparedness, and a few other things. And these are all aspects of ham radio that I'm going to talk about briefly. I'm not going to go too much into it because I could literally make hundreds of videos just on the subject of ham radio alone. And if you look through YouTube and Vimeo and all the video sites, you'll see that there literally are hundreds and thousands of videos about ham radio. But I wanted to talk about it in context of homesteading because obviously we're a homesteading channel. But just kind of share some thoughts on how ham radio has fit into our homesteading and how I think it can fit in to what everyone else is doing on their homesteads. One of the first things that I'm asked about ham radio is, what is it? A lot of people have this impression that ham radio is like CB radio, and if you've been around long enough like me, you'll remember back in the 70s and 80s that there was a big CB radio craze. Everybody got their CB radios from radio. One of the things that I enjoy about ham radio is the aspect of its history. Ham radio has been around for approximately 100 years, give or take. When people first became interested in communicating, it really didn't come into the public consciousness until after the Titanic sank. Interestingly enough, because the Titanic was a cutting-edge ship and it had cutting-edge communication equipment on it, and it used new standards of communication at a time when nobody else used those new standards, you had a failure in communication. What we have here is a failure to communicate. All jokes aside, what happened was the Titanic was sinking. They called for help using all the new standards, the new radio equipment, and not everybody who might have heard them because they were still using the old standards. And there was I shouldn't even say standards. There were no standards at the time. There was no universal way that people were to communicate at the time. But there were some experimenters who were learning how radio signals worked and how to control those things and to communicate. And most of them at the time used spark gap transmitters and a Morse code key. I mean, this is actually a very advanced model comparatively, even though this is about 70 years old. This model is advanced for what it is. Back in the day, though, 100 years ago, they didn't have something as nice as this, but this is an old Navy flameproof key from World War II, and this is my primary Morse code key, and I use it to send Morse code because I like the history aspect of it. I took the time to learn Morse code, and I communicate with other strange and antiquated people who like using Morse code, and it's one of the aspects of the hobby that I enjoy, and this is something that I use to do that. But there's also a misimpression that ham radio is old and stuffy, that ham radio really doesn't have any usefulness. People who may have been around in the 80s and 90s remember, though, that at that time, well, even the 70s, you had ham radio operators who were able to communicate when nobody else could. You don't have a lot of that blackout in communications and in our networks like you did before the age of computers and the internet, when everything kind of went out instantly everywhere. But you had ham radio operators who were providing services. For instance, there were operators all over the world who would set up a radio to telephone network for soldiers overseas to speak with their loved ones when they couldn't use the armed services networks, or the armed services networks were overwhelmed or blacked out or being used for combat operations. So ham radio operators provided that voluntary service. But these days, what's being done with ham radio is so far beyond exciting, in my opinion. I don't have enough time to do all of this because I'm trying to support my family and, step back and learn those even older skills like putting food on the table and canning things. But the stuff that's being done in ham radio isn't just, talking on the radio or using Morse code anymore. As a matter of fact, it's really mostly about digital communications. And what ham radio operators have been known for and what they continue to be known for is innovation. And many of the technologies that we have today were actually invented, designed, and applied by ham radio operators first, because ham radio, as an activity or as a group, is actually a venue or a place where experimenters can experiment. And what you have seen is ham radio operators innovated Wi-Fi technology. Ham radio operators initiated research into cell phone communications, miniaturization. Something like this. This is a Yaesu handheld. We call these HT, or handy talkies as they were nicknamed. And this is a unit that you can put in your pocket and you can use to communicate to towers that are set up around where you get a broader coverage to talk with other people. Well, you might recognize that today as a cell phone tower. And this technology was the predecessor to the cell phone towers. And you can see, it's got a keypad here for dialing in different destinations and different functions. But this sort of technology is actually recognizable now in the cell phones. And if you saw these sort of things back in the 80s where you had the big bricks with the antenna coming out of them, they actually looked very similar. Now everyone has these tablets that they keep in their pocket, just big enough for their pocket, and it accesses the internet and makes phone calls and text messages. Well, all of that was pioneered by ham radio operators. There's actually 3 levels of ham radio license. There's the technician level ham radio license, which is the basic one. There's the general level, which is a little more technologically advanced. And then there's the extra class, which it has some pretty high engineering information in it that you have to learn. And you can certainly memorize the questions, but really understanding it can help you do a lot better if you're going to be learning that, taking the test on it, and then actually using it. It's just an exciting way of innovation and technology. And I'll tell you, it's been very helpful for me in my upbringing, my education, because I became a ham radio operator when I was 15. So I tell people I've been a ham radio operator for 27 years, and they kind of look at me like, wow, you don't look that old. Well, I was pretty young when I got into it. And being a ham, as they call it, at the time, helped me make connections with people who were at the time were working for IBM and Raytheon and Two Cows and all these predecessors to the modern, Silicon Valley. I was hanging out with these guys back in the early 90s when they were innovating all the technologies that we take for granted today. And I learned a lot, and it was a great education and continues to be a good education for children and interested in STEM. So that's a first aspect. I would say it's very good for supplementing your children's education, especially if they're homeschooled, and helping them to see that you can innovate and learn these things in a different context and really have fun doing it either independently or with other people, and really pioneering things like the things that I was exposed to even as a 15-year-old. Basically I was hanging out and playing around with technology that engineers were dinking around with in their spare time. So that was an avenue that I was able to learn things through ham radio. Another thing that I think is very useful for homesteading and ham radio is the emergency communications and emergency preparedness aspect. A big part of that is weather. Many ham radio operators keep an eye on the weather because they know that it's important to report things to other people so that they can see what's coming. There are several weather-based organizations in ham radio, organized groups of watchers or just reporters that can tell people, hey, there's a hailstorm out in this area and I'm going to report that. And a lot of times they'll maintain their digital communications and they'll connect with other people even on the internet or whatnot, but often using ham radios, like this, and checking into groups whenever there's a storm watch that's been alerted by the weather folks. They will report storms and tell people what's going on and warn them. One of the organizations is called Skywarn. Skywarn was really big when I was getting into this, maybe about 25 years ago. I think Skywarn was really busy. I'm sure it's still out there in a different form, but people would monitor the weather and check in and tell people what's going on. There's a lot of websites that do that now, but it's still very active on the radio, especially if you just have one of these sitting in your closet, and you're going to go talk to someone. You say, hey, what's going on across town? It gives you sort of an eye on things that you wouldn't normally see otherwise. One thing that I really enjoy listening to on this particular radio is the Weather Channel. A lot of people have heard those sort of robot Weather Channel voices. Well, where do you think the Weather Channel gets their information? They get it directly from the government stations that are out there. They can either listen to those automated stations like I'm going to show you here, or they can directly download this information from satellites. And I've done that and I've seen that done by others. So you can become an amateur meteorologist if you wanted and get the same information that professional meteorologists get right off of satellites, right off the government sources. And it's pretty easy with a radio like this. This one's pretty cool. All I have to do is hold down a button and it changes over to the local weather station.
East winds up to 10 miles an hour, shifting to the west in the afternoon. The forecast for western Siskiyou County tonight: clear. Low 65 to 75. Northwest winds around 10 miles an hour, shifting to the north.
So if you listen to these automated stations, they will cycle through weather reports for your area, and you can receive that right off the air. And if your power is out or anything is out, these stations are on backups. So as long as you have battery in your radio, you can go listen to these stations. And you can tune to other stations which give you emergency updates. Let's say the whole power grid goes down. Well, they're going to have these backup radio stations on the air that you can go listen to. So that's another aspect for emergency communications, just getting information. Another aspect that I think is very useful for homesteaders is just being able to talk with each other. I'm sure you've seen these little family radio, FRC, family radio service radios that you can buy at Walmart or whatever. They're a little smaller than this. They kind of look like toy walkie-talkies. And you might have taken them to amusement parks or some way of communicating with your family when you're spread out over an area. These radios are far more powerful. These things are about 100 times more powerful. And the base units, which you can use at home, are even far more powerful. You can talk using these frequencies, VHF frequencies. You can talk anywhere from, the horizon limit of 26 miles to, 150 miles on, line of sight and mountaintop communications. And then if you use some of the lower frequency radios out there, you can talk all over the world if you want. It just depends on a lot of factors and how your station is set up and what sort of antennas and power you have and what kind of radios you have, and then who you're communicating with. But a big part of all that is the technical challenge, learning, again, the limitations and the boundaries of the technology, and then pushing it even further while developing your skills. So you can become as involved as you want in ham radio, or you can use it for basic tools and basic communication when you need it to talk with each other, or your neighbors or other homesteaders, or whatever emergency communications channels you have set up. And the really great thing about that is, I suppose the government could eavesdrop and listen and, you know, scan the frequencies, but nobody really cares about general people just communicating in their backyards. Not just backyards, but in their communities. It's, you know, as long as you're licensed and you're doing what you're going to be doing, no one's spying on you, no one's listening to you. Technically they can, but the reality is you're utilizing a method of communication that other people cannot stop or jam, you know, unless there's some sort of foreign military with jamming equipment, which would be a waste of millions of dollars for them. You're just talking in your backyard and nobody can keep you from doing it. You know, the power goes out, or the cell phones go out, or you're cut off from the main communication system because, you know, I don't know, they shut down cell phones, or there's some sort of service attack, or the internet goes down, or God knows what else happens. You can pull these sort of things out and keep talking with each other. So having that sort of operational control, for those of you who've been in the military, having that sort of operational control and that ability to keep communicating in an emergency is really essential. Not only if you're trying to get help, but if you're just trying to coordinate and help others. And I've served in several organizations over the last 25 years that do exactly that. You know, they provide emergency volunteer communications for other people in different situations. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put on some pictures and video here of a recent visit that I made to a ham radio event in East Tennessee when I was back there visiting some friends back in June. And, you know, it's just a good group of folks. You know, that particular group and groups like it go out once a year, and they just they test their readiness for communication. It's called Field Day. Field Day is always held, I think, the last weekend in June. And hams will go out to parks, local parks, and they'll do these public demonstrations for people. And they'll set up generators for power, or solar panels, or wind turbines, and then they'll connect their radios and their antennas, and then they'll see how many other stations they can talk to. And that's a good measure and demonstration of their ability to communicate in a real emergency. And that's an annual event that I try to participate in. Hey, it's Jake here. We're at the W4WC Field Day in Greenville, down at the park. I've met a bunch of good folks down here. They're getting ready for Field Day. Field Day is going to start here in about a half hour. For those of you who don't know, Field Day is an annual emergency communications event where everybody hauls out their antennas and radios to local parks and fields and sets up and just sees how well we can maintain a good emergency communication structure in case of an emergency. So it's a great way to introduce kids and folks to ham radio and show them what it does. We've got a good crowd out here today. We're just getting ready to start. I'm probably going to hang out here for an hour or so and then continue our travels throughout East Tennessee. But this is a good group. You can see behind me they've got some of their antennas set up and RVs and just a bunch of good stuff. This is a pretty good turnout for a club. I wasn't familiar with this one before we came down, but we're going to go ahead and see how it goes. One of the resources that I direct people to, and I'll put a link below, is the National Association for Amateur Radio. It's called the ARRL. It used to be American Radio Relay League. They kept the ARRL, but changed their name to the National Association for Amateur Radio, which would be technically NAR and AAR. But anyway, they put a magazine out every month called QST. And for anyone interested in getting into ham radio, you know, getting a hold of a few of these QSTs, I literally have hundreds of these floating around my house. But, you know, it's a monthly magazine that goes over, you know, it's filled with advertisements for all the greatest and latest radios, but it also goes through a lot of reviews and events and technical articles, letters from people. You know, here's an advertisement for Dr. Arduino, become an electronics master faster. You know, so this is an Arduino education kit, you know, that you can get for yourself or for kids or anything else. You know, there's advertisements. Here's a look at the historic headquarters building with the W1AW radio station. in Connecticut. I mean, there's technical reviews, how to build a mini loop tuner off of the MFJ kits. I mean, there's so many things in here. Most of what I'm talking about is probably foreign language to most people, but a great resource for getting connected with the ham radio community. You know, this shows, here's one from February that shows a gentleman who's experimenting with microwave communications. Another name for microwave communications is 5G. You know, I mean, he's not using 5G literally, but it's that range of frequencies. He's experimenting with that, and people like him pioneered that technology. You know, so you can read this ahead of time. You know, here's one from October of last year that's showcasing some young hams, you know, teenagers who are interested in ham radio and what they're doing. This is a whole article on old antique amateur radio Morse code bugs. That's the tools that they used to use to submit that. Here's some folks who were out for a bike ride when they encountered a ham. So, you know, these magazines are great resource to just sort of see what people are doing, connect with the community. There's local ham radio clubs, but you know, I'm happy to talk with people about ham radio in more detail. Again, there's too much to cover here, but yeah, I'll show you a couple of things that I enjoy the most here. One of the other aspects that I really enjoyed as a teenager and young adult was the opportunity to connect with people outside of my own community. You know, we all, you know, we interact with our families and our friends and maybe, you know, wider groups or churches or just sort of work folks, or we see people at the grocery store and we watch the local news and we listen to local radio, and that's sort of our little life's bubble. But for someone like me who hasn't been able to travel, you know, I've been to Mexico and I've been to Canada and I've been to Alaska and Hawaii and all over the United States, but I haven't been able to travel internationally. But I actually know a lot of people overseas because I was able to talk with them directly. And I think we've lost some of that in the internet age where, you know, we don't have a lot of face-to-face interactions. You know, you might send emails to people, or you might see a website or whatever Instagram pictures they want to put up that present the perfect face of whatever they're trying to show you. But if you want to just talk with people and sort of expand your bubble to include other communities, you can do that with ham radio. And that was something that I appreciated as a young person, being able to learn about other places, other countries, other regions of the world, and then to talk with those same people and to hear their voices and say, you know, hey Fernando, how is the weather in Madrid, Spain today? You know, and having those conversations and expanding that bubble. And, you know, I can hear their perspectives on things. We can chat, we can talk, you can get what the weather is, we can see what people are doing, what they're frustrated with, and just have that human connection that expands your bubble from your little corner of wherever to their little corner of wherever. And I think it just helps us have, you know, a little more of that human contact that we've missed in the internet age. So STEM, better human contact, emergency preparedness and communication, you know, challenging technical aspects, you know, for learning. And some people have even turned it into a career. I know many people who have studied ham radio and electronics, and it has ended up becoming a focus for college or a focus for a career, or even just something that they do on the side. You can learn the skills and then end up doing like engineering technician stuff, like I did for a radio network for a number of years in the Bay Area. And it can lead to entire careers. I know many people have gotten into engineering and science and technology and computers because of their start in ham radio. And then, you know, just having that independent communication network. So there's lots of reasons, I think, to get into ham radio. And again, there's too many to go into right here, but I hope this sort of gave you a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to put some information below for you to read, connections to the National Association for Amateur Radio websites, what is ham radio, how to become a ham radio operator, a little more about what you can do with it, resources for, you know, getting a hold of some of these magazines. If you find a ham who's been a ham for a while and you ask him if he has any extra QSTs floating around, you'll probably get a box. and every ham that I've ever met, there's a few exceptions. I mean, life's the same way. You always have a few curmudgeons in there, but for the most part, most ham radio operators that I know are generous and very giving with their time and their talents and their resources, and they'll share this stuff with you, especially if you're looking to get into ham radio and you say, hey, I want to become a ham, and how do I do that, and you know, what can you help me with? You know, people will walk you through this. They'll even take the time to teach you. You know, sit down. You know, I've done that in the past. Sit down, make YouTube videos. There's lots of great YouTube videos out there. Studying for your ham radio test, even building radios. I mean, there's a whole world that you could get sucked into, but you don't have to. You can do just a little or a whole bunch. You know, there's all sorts of aspects that you can focus on, and it can certainly be adapted for your life on the homestead. Even if you're just carrying your radio in your pocket so that you can talk to your wife when you're down in the back 40 harvesting, you know, 500 pounds of okra. You have that thing on your belt, and you can talk to people, or you can call for help, or you can ask for, you know, somebody send down some ginger ale because I'm getting too hot here out in the field. Or you see a tornado off in the distance and you want to call that in and you know, help people out. There's just so many aspects. So I'd encourage you all to check it out. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'm always glad to answer any questions, how I got into it, sort of things that I'm interested in, and then, you know, just sort of directing people on what they're interested in or not. Thanks for watching our video today. If you like our channel, please click subscribe and hit the bell so that you're notified when we release new videos. And as always, we hope that you have found this useful and educational, and we hope you have a great day.